This Week in Radio Tech, episode 166, is brought to you by Axia Audio and the workhorse Axia Element Audio Console. Watch the Axia installation video and find out more at axiaaudio.com.
And now, our feature presentation.
TWiRT.
Harry Nyquist described digital sampling back in 1922, and Thomas Edison's Alkaline Battery was patented before that in 1904.
All right, calm down. He says that to everyone.
This calls for immediate discussion.
What's up, Doc?
All your days are belong to us.
From his palatial office of important business, or in a choice hotel in a distant land, this is Kirk Harnack.
Chris Tobin hosts this episode of TWiRT along with Chris Tarr and Tom Ray, who are actually all innovators themselves.
You're dialed in to This Week in Radio Tech.
Welcome to This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Chris Tobin. Kirk Harnack is on assignment, so it'll be myself, Chris Tarr, and Tom Ray. And we'll start with introductions first. Tom, introduce yourself.
Myself. Oh, hi, I'm Tom Ray. I'm up here in the Hudson Valley in New York, about 50 miles north of New York City. I run Tom Ray Broadcast Consulting. And actually, I can say it this week where I couldn't say it last week. I am now also a rep for Burke Technology. So,
Wow, yeah. Excellent. Congratulations.
yeah. Isn't that cool?
That's a great product.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Oh, I love it.
I'll have to sell one to Andrew now, even though he probably doesn't need one there.
True, but we could find a reason for it.
I'm always looking to spend money, Tom.
All right. Well, you come to the right place.
And let's go to Chris Tarr.
Hello there. I'm Chris Tarr, Director of Operations and Engineering for 88.9 Radio Milwaukee, and also a contributing writer to Radio Guide magazine and co-founder of the website, The Virtual Engineer, at broadcastengineering.info. And I wonder, now is Kirk like in some kind of plane flying over a foreign country, getting ready to jump and parachute in, or, you know, I mean, the way you put it, I'm wondering if it's some sort of ninja assignment or something.
Yes. No. It's actually it's a personal matter and a commitment that he has to make. I'm sure it has something to do with his wife, but I just thought I'd have some fun with, you know, the traditional. He's not here. He's on assignment. That's how it works. Well, his assignment is to take care of family.
He sent his router out for repair.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, he has issues with that thing. Oh my goodness. Well, this is This Week in Radio Tech, episode 166. Make sure I have that right. And we're going to talk about, or at least try and touch the topics of spring cleaning at your facilities. All right, we've got studios, transmitters, and maybe even the remote gear. People still do those remotes. One of the other things I wanted to talk about, just toss out there, is sometimes I've been getting emails from folks asking all kinds of weird questions about radio in general and days of old and all these other things. So I thought, and we've talked about it through all the other episodes, the various war stories we've had and all the fun that we do. And I wanted to just throw out a few headlines for fun, and just for thinking. It's just for for people to sit back and think about and go, oh yeah, wow, there was a time when this was that. So here's a statement which, if it puts in perspective, today's arguments with radio listening is up, down. I believe Katz Media says in 2012 radio listening is continuing to climb, so it's a good sign. But there was a headline at one time where radio sweeping country million sets in the use throughout the United States. 1 million sets, not radios, but sets. March 1922. So think about that. In 1922, the only source of information outside of the newspaper was an AM radio. 1 million sets made headlines. What would it take today for something to make headlines in radio? Outside of a scandal, things like this. So think about it, right? I thought it was pretty funny because I was talking to someone earlier at a college about radio history and things in the past, and people were like, well, I'm not familiar. I was born in 1975, 1975 or 1981. I have no idea what the past is about. So I just thought I would throw these things out for people to think about. Another one. Here's a good one. Harry Nyquist. For us on the panel, we know who that is. For those of you who are not on the panel, Harry Nyquist publishes the Nyquist sampling theorem. Now you may say to yourself, so what? Well, April of 1922. The Nyquist theorem is what's the basis for all of the digital technology that you use today. Think about it. 1922, he comes up with a theorem, mathematics, on how digital will work, so to speak. And here we are today, many, many years later, still using it and proving it that it can't be changed. As a friend of mine likes to say, who's a science professor, the laws of physics can be altered, and when you do, you sometimes get hurt. So Nyquist had it right, and to this day, it still functions and holds. Right? Do I have anything out of perspective on that one, Chris or Tom?
No, you're right on with that. I mean, it's. I always say, the laws of physics aren't just guidelines; they are the laws. So
that's true.
I think it. You run into that a lot where you've got some of these, very, very important forward thinkers who have come up with these things, and it's amazing how they've stood the test of time. Some of these inventions, some of these ideas. Well, the big news, obviously, this past week for those of us in geek world with the museum up. Who am I thinking of now? And I just completely slipped my mind as I was going along. Not Edison. Tesla, yes.
Oh, Tesla, yes.
Thank you, Eric, for putting that there. The Tesla Museum, the nonprofit organization, closed on that. You look at some of his ideas that he had come up with, and how today they still stand the test of time. So, it just kind of reminds us that good engineering, good theory, physics, all of those things. Quite often, even as technology changes, some of those building blocks still today stand the test of time.
Yeah, they do. And alkaline batteries, right? We use them all the time. I'm sure most people still do. 1904, a patent was issued to Thomas Edison. Now, of course, Thomas Edison, everybody thinks of the light bulb, but he was the first patent on an alkaline battery. So I'm just, again, this is just headlines for fun. I'm not trying to draw any special conclusions, just open thinking.
Right. Well, and again, I mean, that just shows, where people have been. And, you wonder some of the things that have just recently come about, some recent inventions and discoveries. You got to wonder how those are going to be implemented 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now as we look back and see how things are going. But, things like, Nyquist, I mean, who would have thought that would be such an important building block in our industry today? I mean, it's amazing to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's why when I was looking these things up, I was like, wow, Nyquist, I didn't even think of that. And I'm looking at the date and going, oh, wow, I was thinking much later in time, but I was like, wow, 1922. Something else I found, I don't have an exact date, but it's sometime in 1930 or 31. A small laboratory, not known by many at the time, maybe, discovered or was able to mathematically demonstrate that you can send audio, or you can send, I think it was audio and whatever else, like, the mechanical sound through glass. I'm reading this article, and it was Bell Labs talking about something they called fiber optics. But because of the state of the art did not have the ability to go beyond what they could do on paper, it sat dormant until fiber optics came out through Corning and all the others. 1929, I think it was. Think about that. Fiber optics in Bell Labs, but because their thinking was so far ahead of the time, there was no physical material to even create a prototype or a proof of concept in the lab.
To get off on kind of a little bit of a rant here.
Do it.
It kind of disappoints me because things like Bell Labs don't exist anymore. We've gotten out of this whole R&D thing in our country and have just gone to just straight up manufacturing and CAD and there's those discoveries that just haven't that we used to have. My earpiece on here. There's these discoveries that places like Bell Labs made that are just amazing and have stood the test of time. We don't do much of that anymore. We don't do that kind of playing around, tinkering, and innovating because, as far as the companies are concerned, it's gotten too expensive, and they'd rather not do that. They'd rather let colleges and third parties come up with these technologies. They co-opt them and build them. But think about all of the things that, for example, came out of Bell Labs. One of the things I love to do is I love spending time scouring the corners of the internet for stories on the old long lines of the Bell system. Just some of the innovation and invention that came out of that we're never going to see again, but still today stand the test of time. And these people, really, were at the top of their game. They were paid well, and they were paid to just basically create things, to come up with new ways to do things. The only company that I can even think that's close to that is Google, in a much different way. Obviously, they digitally, but Bell Labs, for example, just most of the electronic stuff you're using today, there's at least one thing in that device that you can trace back to a discovery or an invention from Bell Labs.
You mean like the transistor?
Right.
Yes. But you know what's interesting? You wonder how many of these guys were laughed off the face of the earth by their peers because they couldn't produce it and use it. and yet here we are using it today, and that's kind of sad in a way, you know.
Well, yeah. Before I forget, there's a book. I went to a book signing several months ago at the Chemical Heritage Foundation in Philadelphia, and they had a author who wrote a book called The Idea Factory, and it was the history and the stories behind Bell Labs. And this guy told stories that I couldn't do it justice by trying to repeat it now or quote him. But I read the book, and it's just fascinating. And Chris, you're absolutely right. There are things that we take for granted today that were developed, somewhat tested, but were too far ahead of their time to be implemented and just sat on a shelf, or eventually Bell, the Bell system introduced it. Remember video phones? Don't forget that. That technology led to all the various video codecs we have today. There's a few things. Matter of fact, one of the articles in the book talked about the great lengths they went to at the Bell system to develop Western Electric Bell system. The Bell Labs came up with the idea. Western Electric built it. Basically, that's the history of that. And they spent time and energy trying to figure out the best way to suspend phone cables across poles, what type of insulation would withstand the weather elements, what type of connectors could need to be used, and how to do it. And think of it today. Most of the connectors and the mechanisms that we use to protect splices and all that stuff came out of the Bell Labs.
Well, think about all the things that they invented that just never even saw the light of day, that these guys were just playing around with and came up with. Some of that stuff that we use today, were things that were actually byproducts of other inventions, or even just kind of, let's see if this works, and it really doesn't do anything for Bell systems, but it certainly applies to something else. And again, I mean, there's a real lack of that now. There's big R&D departments doing those sorts of things. And granted, we probably, we're so far along now, Moore's Law and things like that there doesn't need to be those huge departments anymore. But I think that, we've gotten away from making things, and that's why, innovation has kind of slowed down a little bit. You look at, again, the great strides at Bell Labs. I mean, we owe a lot of what we do to their research and their work, and it just has gone away. And companies now go, you know what? It's pretty expensive to do that kind of stuff. So we'll just find existing things and use that to build our widgets or whatever. So, it's disappointing to see. And then, you talk about, as Tom was saying, some of these guys who weren't taken seriously, Teslas of the world, who, people thought, and to be honest, Tesla at the end of his years was insane, but, they were taken as crazies. Oh, that's just, because these people were so far ahead of where everybody else was. It was almost like witchcraft to some people. They're going, he's just a crazy guy. But the things that they came up with lasted forever. So it's just interesting when you say those headlines and you talk about some of the people involved. I love the word sets. That really sets kind of the tone of kind of dates it, the radio set. But you look at the people who came before us, and you just look at all of the things they had accomplished over the years. And in a way, it's kind of sad. We don't do much of that anymore.
No, and something else from the Bell Labs folks, because you can relate to today. You have cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity is based on many things. One of them is encryption, protecting your connections, a VPN or TLS on a browser, SSL, all that stuff. Well, in the 1940s, 1943, Bell Labs developed something called SIG-SALLY. What is that? It was the first digital scrambled speech transmission system used by the Allies in World War II. Now think about that. 1943, you're talking encryption to use in war, so you have no control over where it comes and goes. And today, again, these are the forerunners. And then to go totally off a tangent, spread spectrum technology, and that whole concept was actually invented by a movie star. And then
really?
Later, yes.
Yeah, and that's incredible, isn't it?
It's the wildest thing, and this was back during the wartime, just in the Second World War. Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr came up with this way of it was for torpedoes. I think it was for torpedoes or something like that. She came up and developed and patented what we now know as spread spectrum, and the method of moving carriers around and doing all that stuff. Hedy Lamarr. Bell Labs took that same information and developed and moved on, and then in the early 50s, but because again technology was they were too far ahead of the state of the art, developed something called mobile phone, later to become cellular. And the cells were designed to work a certain way. And then Motorola came in and worked with them, and the first mobile phone came out, and cellular technology. And the principles behind cellular phones, not the handset itself and the electronics, but how the phone communicates with the network and how the network manages that connection, came out of Bell Labs at a time when a cell site, a cell phone, mobile base station wasn't even a thought yet. So you got to read the book, Idea Factory. I think it's John Gerstner. Great stuff. You really want to just tweak your memory or just get your brain cells going. It's one of the best. And there's many others. I'm not saying this is the only one. It's not the end all. But I just want to start things off with getting us thinking way out of the box. Tom, you have any great stuff from your days at the OR and the RKO folks and what they've done? I'm sure there's some stuff you can dig up.
Well, not from them, but thinking along the lines of things that people did, and you had mentioned the Warriors before, and actually, pre-wartime. For the life of me, I cannot think of the name of the system now. There was a system that was used, I believe it was by the British, in World War I. That was they were not able to break. Or maybe it was the Germans. I forget.
Germans had the Enigma, the scrambling box.
That's right. That's what I'm thinking.
And
and it's incredible because
Bletchley Labs is what broke it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, even today, it's the hardest thing to break. It's phenomenal what they did with it.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, it'll go up against some of today's digital encryption. I mean, it's
Well, I still think that kind of goes back to, and bringing it back to what we do in broadcasting. Look at all of these things that were developed. They were developed out of a necessity to get something done. And, a lot of that still happens today especially with broadcast engineers. You're out at a transmitter site at 3 a.m. and something is broken and you've got to get it put together and you just have to cobble something together with parts. Sometimes some of the coolest little designs come out of those late night sessions, and in fact, some products. Mark Mueller with his 25 hertz tone decoder, came out of something similar to that. Became a product. Steve Church with the phone hybrid. All of these things kind of came out of people thinking there's got to be a better way to do this, and sitting down and figuring it out. And so I guess number one, engineers are awesome, because it's kind of the thing we do. But it just, you take these things for granted today, and you look back at, where they started, and I think also it kind of teaches us, I think more so engineers are better at this, to not always dismiss new things, because you look back at, AM was a new thing once, FM was a new thing once, and there were a whole bunch of people who went, whatever, it's not going anywhere. And look what happened. It caught on and it moved on. And I think that, most engineers embrace that. I know I've got looking over to my left here, a whole bunch of gadgets that do different things, and I get them just because they're gadgets and they're interesting. I think we always tend to, as engineers, get real into those kinds of geeky gadgets and figure out ways to integrate them with our lives. But in terms of radio, I think a lot of times, a lot of some of the greatest inventions in our industry were developed by guys like Tom and Chris and I and Kirk, and just trying to solve a major problem. And the Enigma system was that way. They're trying to figure out a way to encode messages. So I just, it's good to see that, it's good to talk about where we've been and where we're going, because I think sometimes people, especially nowadays with throwaway stuff, people just assume you push a button somewhere and out comes a widget. There's a whole lot of design and thought that goes into that. And, it may not be as big of an industry, the research and development industry, as it used to be, but it's still there, and it still needs to be, because somebody's got to dream these things up.
That's true. It's true. Well, the microphone I'm talking on is a electric condenser mic. That came from Bell Labs. The image you're looking at me with, the CCD chips technology that's used to make it, came from Bell Labs. And if you're running a Apache server, the Linux basis of Unix computer language came from Bell Labs. So far, I haven't been able to find anything other than the Bell Labs that's made this studio and this netcast possible. And even the The only thing different would be the plastics that we have, and the Lexan and that material came from DuPont. But I'm sure somehow Bell Labs is involved.
Did you see the article in Radio World that just came out about the VU meter?
Yes.
The VU meter we use today,
volume units,
came from Bell Labs.
Yes. that 1/4-inch plug. Where is that little thing of mine? Here it is. There you go. That came from the telephone company. Yeah. So.
And just again, we're going off on a tangent, but I love talking about this stuff because it's so fun. You look at the Bell system, and you talk about things like those jacks. All of that came about to be as efficient as possible in the field. Now, if you back in the days when the Bell system was around, if you went from one Bell system market to another, everything was identical. Everything was consistent. Even the way the trucks were laid out, the inside of the trucks were laid out identically. So you could go from one place to another, step right in and get working. But, things like those jacks and those sorts of things were built for uniformity and to be able to be, mass produced and, be consistent. And there's a lot of elegance to the former Bell system. And I still use some of those principles today, just because, in the way that they operated and the way that they ran their business on the engineering side was just so, they did an excellent job with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One thing, the reason I was going on this tangent with the Bell Labs and the headlines of fun is when I was talking to these college students recently, some of them, they're engineering types, some of them were mathematical, accounting. It was a combination. It was a college radio station, so it was more than just science-related or technical-related students. And somebody in the group was asking, well, what's the point of all this? When I was talking about Bell Labs and discoveries and Hedy Lamarr, or Headley, depending on the movie reference, I was trying to explain to them, I said, it's not that they just discovered this and we're now beneficiaries of the discovery. It's how they got to it. If you read this book or you read about anything with the discoveries of many, whether it's in chemistry or architectural or even electronics, it's how they get to the thinking process. As Chris, you pointed out, the uniformity of the Bell system was there not just because it was convenient. By today's standards, somebody would say, well, you cut your costs. I'm a business student. That means the cost of production is less. Well, yeah, that was part of the driving force. But the reality was to provide a service that could be second to none so they could make the money and just keep making it. That kind of thinking is what's missing in a lot of, as you pointed out earlier, developing. Like, you and I and Tom and Kirk and others like us who do work in radio and work in facilities, we're presented with questions and problems, and because of our backgrounds and what we've burned our fingers on over the time, we sort of look at something and go, before I say yes or no, I have a pretty good idea of how we need to go about this. But I was working with some students recently with some IP technologies for their studios, and all their approach to fixing a problem was power cycling, unplugging. It wasn't stepping back and going, okay, what did I miss? I've just programmed 3 pages of settings, and did I maybe miss? No, unplug. And I'm just fascinated. So talking with the students, that's why I brought this up tonight with the topics, and just say, hey, let's get back to some of the old roots and think about this and step back and take a breath, or as the old phrase goes, smell the roses. Now, maybe I'm off on that, but you guys, throw your 2 cents in and say, hey, what's your experience with that?
No, I completely agree. I think that, oftentimes, we just we live in a throwaway society. And so therefore we want everything cheaply and good enough. We don't want it to be great. We don't need it to be great, at least in our own minds. And I think we've trained ourselves with that. A great example of that is, again, I go back to it, the Bell system and Bell Labs. The prices are certainly much lower than they used to be, but the service is horrible now compared to the way it used to be. And that's a whole other discussion. But there was people that has become a distant memory, and so most people don't have anything to compare it to. And you go, boy, you think back and you go, oh, it was so, there really was a lot of things that were great about the old Bell system. Most people remember that, don't care. And so, okay, I'm going to buy my cheapy little, Panasonic digital phone, put on voice over IP. If my calls get through 90% of the time, we're good, and that's just become the way it is. And I think back many years ago, kind of when HD radio just first started getting rolled out across the country. And I ran into a situation where I had a transmitter site and I needed to replace the backup transmitter with an HD transmitter. But as I just mentioned, I lost my backup transmitter as part of that. Well, we kept thinking there's got to be a way, the way these transmitters are set up, where we can use an HD analog hybrid transmitter and be able to switch from digital to analog on the fly. And so we talked to the manufacturers, and nobody did it except for Nautel. And they said, "Oh, well, we didn't even think about that." But yeah, our transmitters will do that. We built in the ability to change frequencies and modes because we're selling it as kind of a multi-mode, frequency agile type of transmitter. So yeah, you can set it as a preset and trigger the preset, and you can have your analog backup in your digital system. Well, shortly after that, we made a huge deal out of that as a company, and sure enough, a year later, Harris, now everybody does that. But it's that sort of thinking and those sorts of companies that are willing to step back and go, okay, let's see what we can create. In our industry, Nautel has kind of been really taking the lead in terms of transmitters, and you've got Telos with their Axia system, and you've got Wheatstone with their system. We do see some companies that are really doing an excellent job of innovating, but again, it takes people asking those questions and pushing these people to explore their explore their own products and push them a little farther. So I do. I think that as a kind of a general population, we've gotten really good at accepting okay from our products.
No, you're right. You're right. Oh, here's a good test for anyone involved in a meeting. If you're an engineering person, I know somebody like Dave Simon at Bell Media in Canada would definitely do this little trick. I've done this on many occasions. I'm trying to make a point with a group of folks, and it's fun. Take a telephone, place it on the table in the conference room you're in or meeting room, whatever it is. Make sure the wire is plugged into the back of the phone. It could be a digital phone. It doesn't have to be a Type 500. Oh, I'm sorry, a traditional handset phone. I'm sorry, or a 2564. Oh, that's right, that's touch tone. Type 500 is a rotary phone. Okay. Anyway, take the phone, place on the table, do your meeting, and then say, sort of like at a timely moment when there's a pause in the action, ask someone to call for somebody and say, hey, get so-and-so on the phone. I need information. I'm missing something in my PowerPoint presentation. Then watch what happens. They will go to the phone, they will pick it up, and all of a sudden the look on their face of horror that there's no dial tone. There's nothing. And what I'm trying to prove, the point that you just made, was things that are just good enough, or as the folks at Disney always have told folks that go to the Disney University, it's all about expectation. The phone system, the Bell system, from the inception to today, well, its inception until its breakup, it was all about an expectation. Nobody ever questioned dial tone on a phone. It was always there. That came with a price. But that price was all the innovations that we now know. So if you're ever talking or in a meeting talking about expectations, reliability, and what you're trying to do at a facility, the great example of expectations and just assuming everything is normal is the telephone test. I've done this a dozen times over the last 10 years, and it works every time. It gets the point across real fast, and the folks in the budget, the business office suddenly go, okay, I understand why you need the money. Okay, let's figure out a better way to make the money happen, but now I get it. I kid you not, it will work. Give it a whirl.
I think about that, and you're talking about talking to students, and one thing that I think about a lot is, I wonder where the future of innovators are going to come from. Fortunately, most of what we do today can be done, using the internet, and we have some very smart young people coming up, in working in that direction. And somebody else talked about hacker spaces and things. And I think, just recently, I think and I could be wrong, and you guys maybe can either back me or not, but it seems like there's kind of this renaissance in making things again. And I've seen a lot of things lately with people getting together, creating things using, laser or the 3D printers and things like that, and just getting together and making new things. And I love to see it. I think that's fantastic. I think that, we're starting to kind of get this, it's becoming cool again to make things instead of, it used to be cool to just buy stuff. And it's gotten to be cool again, especially with the younger crowd, to be making things. And I think that's fantastic.
I think you're right, Chris. Have you been in a Radio Shack lately?
Yeah, I am surprised they've got stuff in there again.
Yeah, they're carrying kits again. They're carrying electronic kits. You can make all kinds of cool little things, from everything from one of those little electronic dice games, which kind of gives you, practice soldering, to an Arduino kit, and you can program the microprocessor and make something useful. So I'm impressed.
Well, I hope that part of that renaissance, as you put it, Chris, is because the type of mind that you need to have, not need to have, but that type of mind requires working on stuff, putting it together, and visually looking and saying, wait a minute, can I make this work? How do I do this? And that is where it starts. I mean, I've watched friends of mine with their kids, and you watch, the best thing is watching children. I don't have any, so I have to watch others. But watch how they interact with their environment. It is the most fascinating learning experience you'll ever have. And you can take a lot from that. And I think it's nice to see that some of that's starting to come back, whether it's because we've been a society of just everything is made for us, it's just plug and play, and all of a sudden we've become bored, or maybe the plug and play technology has made it possible for us to think beyond the physical of what we have and say, well, what if I could do this? How do I get to that? And that's the tinkering part, which is what tinkerers do.
So. I think that I think we've gone in a cycle. I think we had the internet kind of take hold and take off in the early 90s, and we had this whole generation that pretty much just lived on the internet. That's what they did, and they kind of the instant gratification, just anything I want is on the internet. And I think what's going on is I think as these kids get older, they're starting to realize that there were some experiences that they missed out on. I don't think they know what it is, but I can tell you from looking at my kids, I think there was a generation almost gap there where there wasn't a lot going on because there was a whole lot of just Moore's law kind of things taking over and rapid innovation with things like the computer and the internet, where that kind of was a distraction. And things like, things have kind of slowed down on that front a little bit. I think you've got some people who are quite frankly just kind of bored and overloaded by what's going on the internet, and their curiosity is taking them back into how do these things work. And look at things like and I'm sure Tom Ray probably knows about this as I do, being active hams, but the number of ham radio licenses are up. Somebody on the chat room just now, Suncast, mentioning Raspberry Pi. That thing has exploded. And I think there's this whole generation now that's starting to kind of wake up and go, these things are cool, but I want to know how they work. I want to know how it all fits together. And I think also it's kind of a social thing. It's a way for these people who were social on the internet to be social with people with that same kind of desire and to get out and do those things. So I'm optimistic that in the next few years here we're going to see some major innovation come out of these things.
I think you're right, Chris, because you mentioned the ham radio stuff. I mean, in our ham radio club over the last 3 years, we've brought about 54 people into the hobby, by offering classes and such. And now we're offering classes to upgrade. And the nice thing to see is the people who are there are not just picking up the book going, okay, I'll memorize this question. They want to know why. They want to know why when I do such and such, this happens, which is very refreshing because it's a lot of fun to teach the class because you can actually get into it with them and show them the electronic things and show them how Ohm's law, it's not just something we're telling you to fog your brain. It actually works. And, so it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of people want to build their own antennas. We have a lot of people who say, gee, my radio's not working right. Well, how can I fix it? And they'll come to me or a couple other guys in the club who know how to do that stuff, and we show them. And it's a lot of fun, and it's good to see people actually wanting to know how things work again instead of just put the key in the ignition, turn it, starts, I drive.
Well, I think the invention of digital modes have helped a lot. The PSK modes and that sort of thing. But something real interesting that kind of makes that point is we have a very strong intern program at Radio Milwaukee. Obviously, public radio. We work a lot with the schools in the area, and we get every quarter or every semester we get 3 interns. Well, for the first time ever, we had an intern who signed up because they wanted to intern in engineering. They wanted to know how radio transmitters worked. He's an electrical engineering student. Wanted to know how to manage facilities. Work on transmitters and studio equipment. I was floored. I almost fell out of my chair when I heard that. I said, "Yes, absolutely." Sign this person up. I want them here. I hope that, selfishly, in terms of our industry, I hope that this continues, because I think that naturally people are going to find radio broadcasting interesting. In fact, look here on GFQ and before with TWiRT, how many people would take part in our discussions who aren't even radio engineers, who are just computer gearheads who are real interested in how this stuff works and wanting to learn more. And I think that that can only help our industry as all of a sudden these kinds of technologies become interesting again, and not necessarily because of the equipment, but because of how it works in the background. And I think that I'm like I said, I'm optimistic that I think that in the next few years we're going to see a whole new group of people who are ready to get in there and do some innovating.
No, it's true. No, that's absolutely true. Well, I think through through SPE and the amateur clubs and other stuff, people will definitely see the interest and have their interest and find an avenue to bring it out. Now we're about the halfway mark on the show, so I guess we probably should try and move to some topics people may be more interested in or want to change of things. Something I wanted to ask the two of you. There was an article in Radio World some time back that a gentleman was talking about the low-profile antennas on cars today that are for AM, FM, satellite, and all that stuff. In your experiences, I think the article is sort of swayed in the direction of the inferiority of the antenna. How is the quality really that good? Are we as broadcasters losing out because of the design, industrial design folks? In your experiences, say Tom, I know with your Ford issue from last year or 2 years ago, have you noticed or any differences with those new shark fin antennas, low profile type antennas, whether it be on your own car or rentals or anything you've traveled about?
It's hard to say, Chris, because you don't know what that radio is doing that's in the car. I said this a couple of weeks ago. I'm technical editor for Talkers and RadioInfo.com, and one of the topics at NAB this year was AM revitalization, and Talkers kind of came out and the AM revitalization, and I came back and countered and said, well, wait a minute, AM is still vital, and I think we as an industry are partially to blame for this, because we have allowed the receiver manufacturers to put out lousy sounding AM receivers.
That's right.
And like with FM, whether you two agree with me or not, go ahead and blast me if I'm wrong, but GM put out the FM radios that have the high blend feature. That drives me out of my mind. So unfortunately, I don't know if it's the radio or the antenna, but that little shark fin antenna, unless they've got a heck of an AM amplifier on it, unless they've got some type of a ferrite rod in that antenna for AM, it doesn't have any gain. It doesn't have anything at AM frequencies. So you're relying strictly on the on either an amplifier on that antenna for AM or the preamplifier in the radio to boost up like an AM signal. Even an FM signal. Let's face it, an FM wave is about 9 feet long.
Yeah.
An antenna this big ain't going to do it. You've got to amplify the living heck out of it. And, I don't see where it's helped us at all by having these antennas on there. And I don't know if they've necessarily gone out and tested, because I think sometimes the receiver manufacturers and the car manufacturers have a perceived notion that's different than what we do of what our signal coverage should be. And you get 20 miles out of town, you can't hear the station anymore. They go, yeah, okay, fine, next.
See, I've actually had really good luck with these smaller antennas, surprisingly, because I'd look at them and go, yeah, there's no way this thing's going to work very well. And one of my cars, I have the shark fin. Another car that I just got rid of, I had a little kind of the window embedded in the back window, the small, just little wire embedded in there. And both of them actually worked exceptionally well. The shark fin that I have is on a 2007 Chrysler, and both AM and FM actually have excellent reception. I'm not, in fact, it's kind of odd. I wondered how they made the antenna, because it actually works pretty well. But I think that the industrial designers are right. I don't think people want big old antennas sticking out of their cars anymore. So something has to happen, and it seems like they've done a pretty good job, trying to make the system work as well as it can and still meet the design guidelines. Now you're right, Tom, with AM reception, but I think that's more of a receiver function than an antenna function. I think that AM unfortunately continues to kind of take the hit in favor of FM and satellite. They just don't pay any attention to the AM stage of the radio. It just has to work, and it just has to work okay. And I know there were some studies a while back where they tested most AM radio, or not most. They took a really good sampling of AM radios, and all of them really didn't pass anything more than 6 kilohertz worth of audio. And in fact, some people were saying that it was that was kind of a reason why some stations really wasn't a big deal if they dropped their bandwidth down to 6-7 kilohertz. And in fact, in some cases on those radios, it sounded better because they weren't trying to push audio outside of the passband of these radio systems. So there is that, and I think that I hope that somewhere down the line as they start working on these chipsets to do all different modes of radio. I know Kirk and I were talking the other day about a new chipset that's coming out that doesn't have AM, which is really odd, but does FM, all digital modes, DRM, all those sorts of things on one chip. Now I'm hoping that it gets to the point where the manufacturers start building all of these things in there and testing them as a system, but that's probably a dream.
Okay. Well, the reason I brought it up was when I read the article, I play around with a lot of RF stuff, and years ago I was playing with fractal antennas for some RPU Marty type remote broadcast equipment, and it actually worked really well. So if you can picture this, like what looks like a little stencil, rectangular stencil, and had just lines on it, it actually operated around 10 watts at 450 megahertz and had a gain of 3.5 dB. It was flat. I mean, literally, it was a decal. You stick it on the glass or a plexiglass surface, and off you go, and feed it with a transmitter with a matching circuit, capacitors to match the line, the antenna, and the transmitter. So I decided to look up some stuff, and there's an IEEE paper that talks about advancements in automotive antennas. And I have to find the link. But they talk about, it's a type of fractal antenna design and a few other things where they actually use various filters and I will call it substrate cutting that actually resonates at octaves of the frequencies, and the gains and the waveforms they show are pretty cool. So I have to say personally, as I agree with you, Chris, my experience with the shark fin, or what they call the bee sting antenna, is that long, thin one with the spirals on it. I haven't noticed a difference, but I will agree that Tom is right. I think as an industry, we've sort of dropped the ball. I agree with you as well, Chris, that we've dropped the ball in paying attention to keeping things current. I've always been a proponent of AM stations doing more and not just assuming the end is here and it's over with. I know at the NAB this year, there was talk of the AM panel with the Commissioner Pai about, what do we do? And there's proponents about going all digital 24/7 or just that and the other. And, we need to, the AM band is a hostile environment. I think was a comment that was made as well. I would think there's probably many things that have to be done to help move things along. And the first thing would have to be do the content, make sure the transmission systems are where they should be. I know from personal experience working with AM systems and directional AMs, when we tweak the antennas and the pattern and the components in the tuning cavities, dog houses, you name it, the entire transmission system, the difference on the radio, we didn't tell anybody what we were doing. We actually got calls from folks saying they were able to hear the station in places they could not before. So
I truly believe that is the number one thing we need to work on the AM band is the engineering. I took over a station a while back that was a little daytimer AM, and you couldn't hear it anywhere, and it was awful, and we need to look at a translator and this and that. I said, well, give me some money and some time to work on this for you. And I put in some new audio processing, put in a better STL link, tweaked on the transmitter, cleaned out the brush out of the tower site, and all of a sudden, they got out farther than they ever expected, and legally. And they went, wow, we just sound fantastic. We're getting calls from all over the place. So I think, sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Maintain those sites. invest in them. And it is hard. If you're a small AM station, it is hard to spend money, and it is hard to make enough to keep things running. But things like just keeping the tower base clean, keeping weeds out from your ground system, those are things that can, you can do very inexpensively and will assure that, your signal is the best that it can be. And, so I completely agree with you that, the engineering has to be there. And I think that a lot of people, I do hear a lot of complaining from smaller operations, but they're also the same ones that, really, refuse to spend a lot of money on anything new. Well, this new stuff is all junk. Like, well, sometimes you got to do some upgrades and spend a little bit of money to get you there. But, I mean, there are, again, I point to the news talk station here in Milwaukee has been number one and has been for decades, and it's AM. But they also, Andy Laird is the vice president of engineering there. He does a fantastic job. The engineering on that station is just amazing, and they spend a lot of time and a lot of effort on it, and it shows. And then there are other stations in the market that the AM is kind of an afterthought, and it shows.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
No, that's true. And before you mentioned upgrading and such, and upgrading is always a good thing, but maybe we should take care of what we have first, because there are a lot of stations. And how many times have you driven by a site and taken a look at the towers, and they're more rust and pink than orange and white?
Oh yeah.
I mean that's just a basic thing. I mean, that tower is the last stage. That's the very last thing between you and the listener, and you're letting it rot. Look at these stations that don't hire engineers anymore, or will bring in the first contract guy that walks through the door for the least amount of money. So you're absolutely right. I mean, even aside from the upgrading, the site that I'm talking about, they didn't have an engineer at all for a long time. I mean, they just kind of let it run, and when things broke, there was a guy they knew who kind of knew something about electricity, and took care of it, and didn't really have a qualified person involved. So again, these are also, a lot of these guys that are complaining are guys that, don't want to pay for competent engineering because that's too expensive, but it pays back. It's worth it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because that's exactly when we opened the show, we talked about, headlines of fun and where things were going. And you pointed out that a lot of folks have pretty much become complacent, and just good enough is acceptable. Well, here we go. Fast forward now to where we are on the show. And what you're talking about is exactly the same thing. It's good enough. I'm on the air. I can hear it. Nothing's broken. We're fine. Meanwhile, the reality is, yes, you're on the air, but probably at reduced pattern, reduced coverage. And then when you do bring somebody in to fix the problem that you think there is, they're just good enough to get the problem fixed to a certain level, but really didn't solve anything. It just appears to be a solution. So, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. We have to take it by the horns and get things back in order. Speaking of towers being not painted or fading, and things like that, spring cleaning. What do you, Tom? What would you say if you had to list 5 things that I am an engineer for a station in, say, Somerset, New Jersey, and I've got a radio station. It's an FM tower that's part of a 3-tower array of AM. It's an AM FM, and I've got my 3 bays, a transmitter site that is somewhat remote, many trees, and there's a babbling brook going through the property. What would you think, or what would you say 5 things that come to mind for spring cleaning purposes?
Babbling brook going through the property. I thought he was the guy on the air. Anyway,
that too. If he's a boss jock in Philadelphia on Famous 56, absolutely.
There you go. But no, well, the first thing I would do, even before I got out into the tower field, is how is the transmitter and building cooled? If it's an air conditioning system, have the air conditioning system serviced, have the condenser coils cleaned, because what you don't want to do is have that thing fail when it's 95 degrees outside. If the building is cooled just by pulling air through with a fan, oil the blower motor, replace the air filters. And, speaking of that, you do have air filters over your air intakes, right? Boy, I can't tell you how many places I've been in where, you just open the transmitter and it's all grit because the place is filthy. And it's just because it's sucking crud in from outside. Go out to the towers. Take a look at the towers. You've got, at least with an AM, you've got a piece of normally copper pipe that comes out of the tuning house, goes to the tower, has a twist in it. which is actually a lightning impediment. But is that tight? Has that been blown loose in the wintertime? Look up the tower. If your tower has sample loops, are the sample loops actually attached to the tower, or are they hanging? If you have transmission line, you have that FM up there. Does it look like that transmission line is attached? Down near the bottom of that transmission line, there should be a ground strap attached to the tower. Is that actually attached? Is it swinging in the breeze? Take a look at the base insulator. A good look at the base insulator. If you're take a look, make sure there are no cracks that develop in the wintertime, because let's face it, water gets into places that you wouldn't think, freezes, cracks the insulator, and you don't want that crack to develop and go down and have the tower collapse. If there's a corona ring around the top of the insulator, take a look in the corona ring. There are usually little weep holes to drain the water out. Make sure those are clear. Like Chris said before, take a look out in the field. Clear out the weeds, especially from around the ground screen, which should be around the base of the tower. Get rid of all that stuff. Go out and walk the property if you can, if it's not a swamp where you'd be swimming the property. But go out and walk around, take a look-see, see what's going on out there. Did something get blown off the tower? Do the guy wires look good? Do you have anything tangled in one of the guy anchors? There's a whole lot of stuff to go out and do. I mean, very basic. Open the tuning house, sweep it out. Things get in there. Crud, dust and crud gets in there. Things that can arc over. If you have cabinets, open the tuning cabinets. Look at the tuning networks. Do you have critters? Get rid of them. Nothing's worse than Mickey Mouse going across a coil, and next thing you know, you're out there picking mouse guts out of the coils, and the station's off the air while you're doing it. So,
That's
not
true.
a pleasant thing. Not a pleasant thing. Also, take a look if your tower has ball gaps at the bottom for lightning protection. Make sure they're still intact. A couple of good lightning strikes, those things can fall apart, or very simply just from age, they could fall apart. So take a look and make sure those are there, and make sure you still have your protection.
Yep, no, that's right. So, Chris, here's this one. This is the scenario for you. You're a FM station. You don't have an AM counterpart, but you're part of a 3-station combined antenna farm on a tower that shares space with a TV station. If I'm the engineer for the FM station, what should I be thinking about for spring cleaning? All that kind of stuff. So you're one of 3 FMs on a TV tower combined, and you've got to check on things for the spring.
Well, a lot of that depends on who the tower owner is and that sort of thing. But definitely, with a combiner system, you want to check for heat in the cavities. Make sure that there's nothing in there that's excessively hot, which is usually the sign of something not being happy. All the things that Tom said: change filters, take the transmitter down, clean them out, check HVAC. You want to make sure, especially in a joint site, you want to make sure that you're checking your power levels and make sure you're not adding to anything. But also remember that the FCC says if you're one, you're everything. So if you're part of this entire combined site, you're responsible as much as your counterparts are. So I'd even take the time to check through, obviously without touching other people's things, but look at your part of the system going in and then the complete system going out, and make sure that again your connections to the combiner are good, that there's no issues there. Do you have a reject load? Test that. Test your antenna switches. All those things are things that are going to come up in an emergency, and there's nothing worse than your transmitter goes off the air and you go to hit the switch to switch over to your backup or something, and it doesn't work, or you go to work on your main transmitter and your dummy loads failed for some reason, or the blower doesn't come on, or something like that. So, again, these are all things that you have to work through and look at. All those different components of your system that you're going to need, and make sure that they're all functional. And I always try to at least once a quarter, pick a night, shut everything down, clean out transmitters, clean out the switches, clean out the entire my part of the site. I am on a shared site on one of my stations, and make sure to do everything in my power, at least for my section of that site, to make sure. Also, you didn't mention it, but I'll assume that there's a generator there. It might be a shared generator. And I have a shared generator at one of my sites, but I have my own transfer switch. So check the transfer switch. Make sure that's functional. Make sure that whoever was supposed to be taking care of the generator, whoever maintains that, make sure that it's been maintained. Check the logs. Because again, even on a shared site, even if you're not responsible for something, you're relying on that to work. So, it's always good practice to just make sure that things are getting done. And it kind of goes to know your neighbors. In this particular site, I'm real good friends with the other engineers, and we all have keys to each other's suites and things. And so, we kind of know what's going on. But again, you're as responsible as the other guys to make sure that everything is working fine. So, and then the other thing that I want to mention, and this applies to any site anywhere, document, have a log at the transmitter site of all your readings of everything. Every time you go in, put the date down, take all the readings on everything that's got a meter. And that way, if there's a problem, you have a reference. You're not trying to go back and guess what these things are supposed to be. So if your transmitter is slowly losing power, or there's some parameter that's changing, or there's a transformer that's failing, or the line pressure's off to your transmission line, whatever, you have some history there to say, okay, over time, this number's been decreasing, or over time this has gone kind of wonky, or even I need to retune things. Where should I be? How should it look? Where should I be at historically? So make sure that is out somewhere, and that every time you go to your site, you document all that. But spring cleaning is a good time to make sure that that's working. Your fire alarms, your fire extinguishers, all that kind of thing. That everything like that is buttoned down.
Cool.
And Chris, you had mentioned you shut the station off and go through things. That in an AM station, you go through the tuning houses and tighten everything, all the connections to the capacitors, the coils, because there's nothing worse than a high current connection with a loose connection, because that sucker heats up. Next thing you know, poof.
Or even better, invest in, and I know you guys do this, invest in a little infrared thermometer, and turn the transmitter on, go to the tuning units, and hit the coils and caps with it. See if there's any hot spots. That's usually something that has failed or is going to fail.
That's also good to do with the breaker boxes, the fuse boxes, and the generator transfer panel. See if you have anything heating up on one of the connections there.
Yeah, in fact, I have a friend of mine who's an engineer, a contract engineer, has a service now where he has an actual infrared camera, and you can pay him, and he'll come out and he'll shoot anything you want with the infrared camera. He does transmission lines, antenna systems, you name it. And it's actually, I've had him do this in the past, where I've had him come and just do a baseline, so that if there is a problem later on, I have a baseline to compare it to. So he can do the imaging on the transmission line and find if there's a hot spot where maybe there's piece of damaged line, but I'll know because I'll have the baseline from when everything is working okay, and can compare it. So you can even go that far.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we talked to the transmitter sites. Now, what about the studio? Let's see. What I used to do when I chief engineered studios, we checked generator. We checked the STL paths if we had the radio STLs, the classic Mosleys or Martys, or the few others that are out there, and the antennas to make sure everything is tweaked or peaked. And then we also tested our disaster recovery plan, walked through the binders, the paperwork, and discovered whether or not the names are correct, the phone numbers still work, the doors and the keys are still accurate, to name a few things. Also, we'd go offline at some convenient time on the overnight, whether it be on a Saturday into Sunday morning, which happened to be less frequently listened than Sunday into Monday, and do a complete end-to-end check with the studio stuff out to the STLs. Let's see what else. If at the STLs we had tower lights on those, because maybe we're on a tall building, even though we may not be responsible because we're at a lower structure, I used to make sure I talked with the building managers to say, hey, what's your log? Have you checked these things? When was the last time the lights were inspected? Stuff like that. So that's a real brief one for studios. So the same thing applies. And I have to say it does pay off. I mean, I'm sure you guys have done this stuff and found things and go, oh, that was a good one.
Oh, yeah. No, there are plenty of times I've found things going, boy, I'm glad I found that now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've had a few like that, too. And as Tom pointed out, you make sure that the nuts and bolts are tight. I've had a few burned holes through coil connections in my tuning houses at the 50,000-watt station.
Well, a great example of that is how many times have you seen in recent years where the FCC has fined an AM station for having a broken fence?
Yes.
I mean, that's something that you can real easily spot when you're doing that check. When you're walking around, you go, oh, I got to take care of that because I'd rather find that broken than have the inspector.
Absolutely.
So, and the FCC is cracking down on things like tower lights and fencing. So take the 10 minutes to walk around and just make sure everything's okay.
And make sure your guy anchors are enclosed in the fence and not open to the weeds and accessible to the public. I have been at some sites where I've noticed that. I've observed, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting guy anchor that's near the roadbed. Where's the... where are the fences and the signs to warn people? So, yeah. And also, it would help to... Spring cleaning is a good time to check on your licenses, paperwork for the FCC, both the transmitter site, studio, maybe a quick look at the public file, that kind of stuff. Because, you tend to forget these things over time, and all of a sudden one day somebody comes knocking at the door, and you're like, yeah, we got that. Oh, wow, that's not the renewed one.
One of the things that I do, I try to do quarterly, I do at least semi-annually, is the FCC publishes the self-inspection checklists for AM and FM. And it's great. You take that checklist, you start working your way down, and you go to all your sites and you follow the checklist, and it's a real easy way to take a look at the things that that the FCC looks for. Now, obviously, it doesn't help you at all with the technical things like, is that HVAC blower going to die, or, do those filters need to be replaced? But in terms of making sure that you're compliant with the FCC, it's a great worksheet to use to go around and check your public file and make sure that everything's in order. Because that's just as important as making sure your technical plant is running. You can have the nicest plant in the world, but if you don't take care of your FCC documentation, none of it matters.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I have been at places where those things were overlooked, but the checklist is ideal. That's a great way to go. You're pretty much covered. I've done it a couple of times and it pays off. So, but looks like we've come to the end of the show. We've wrapped up. We've actually done an hour, a little over an hour. So it's we'll go around the table, so to speak, the round robin, and any closing thoughts, comments, or suggestions for the viewing audience. Tom, we'll start with you.
No, boy, we covered a lot of stuff, but no, there's nothing in particular that comes to mind. It's just, like Chris and I and you have brought up, there's just a lot of things to take a look at with your spring cleaning, and a lot of things just kind of put in your mind that you're looking for trouble, and see what you can find, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. And you're right that the FCC checklist is a really, really good tool to have. It's real easy to go through, take you about an hour, maybe two, depending on how many sites you have. And you'll know if you're good. It's better to do that and find something wrong than have somebody from the commission come pounding on the door and finding out that way.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And Chris?
Now, here's before I go, I'm going to point this out because we were just talking about it. I have my trusty iPad here that I keep with me all the time when I go do work. And on here, I'll see if I can hold it up toward the bottom. You probably can't see that, but I do have there is an app out there that's the Title 47 app that has all the rules for broadcast in it, and I also have PDFs of that checklist and those other things. I also on here keep all of my equipment manuals. So when I go to do these inspections and I do the spring cleaning, I have all the information with me, and I also find that it's really valuable. Even for those quick visits, when you go to you go to a site, you go, oh, is that compliant? And you look it up right away. There's no question about it. You're set to go. Maybe middle of the night you're running late, and you don't know if that manual is at the studio or the transmitter. I know that I have it. As long as I have this, I have everything that I need. So it kind of goes along with the spring cleaning. It might be a good time, if you haven't, to get PDF versions of all of your equipment manuals and find somewhere to store them.
And let's put Tom up on the screen. We have Tom showing us. Yes.
As a matter of fact, I'm going out to do a couple of inspections tomorrow for the New York State Broadcasters Association. This is the AM checklist. And we also have the FM checklist. They also have television checklist, LPFM checklist, non-commercial checklist. Just go to the FCC website and put in the search box self-inspection checklist. It'll take you to a whole page of all these things. They're real easy to get, real easy to download, and real easy to follow.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Well, I'll close out with a reminder that the book that I was talking about to get your brain cells cooking and thinking out of the box at your radio station or TV station or LPFM, and that is The Idea Factory, John Gerstner. check it out. It's pretty cool. So it's the Bell Labs and Innovations and how they got to where they are, where they were. Also, there was an article in Radio World about FEMA and Premier Radio Networks. My only opinion, I wasn't going to ask anybody to bring this up. I read the article. It's just interesting. It's a good thing. But if you have an opportunity to support the other radio networks out there to get involved, definitely bring it up to your engineering management. Because I think if you're going to reach the folks nationally, Premier Radio Networks is definitely one. But you have Cumulus Media and you have Dial Global and a few others that people should talk to. So just again, it's out of the box thinking. So when you read the article and see that stuff, and if you're part of a group and you have an opportunity to offer some input, throw it out there. That's about it. So with that, we come to a close for This Week in Radio Tech, episode 166. And Tom, myself, and Chris Tarr, if you have any questions for us, feel free, and Kirk, even though he's on assignment, we'll include him today. thisweekinradiotech.com, drop a note, we'll get back to you. I've been getting emails from a lot of folks. Thank you very much some of them are very good questions, others are very crazy. And then just for closing, from my perspective, when I've done spring cleaning, common sense thinking. Just sit back, look out the window and think about your facility and all the things it does, and you'll probably remember, oh, there's a piece of equipment in a closet, totally forgot about, but it's part of the operation. So I'll leave that with you. So that's it for tonight. This Week in Radio Tech, episode 166. Tom?
Hey, good night.
Chris?
And thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks for watching. We appreciate it.
And those of you watching, Chris Tarr's microphone is a SM5B from Shure Brothers, or SM5.
Yeah, I'll turn it here.
We'll put Chris. There you go. There you go. That's the microphone. And the only reason I point that out is because when I was at the NAB, I went to the Shure Brothers booth and bumped into a few friends from other radio groups and a manufacturing group, and we got talking about why was the SM5B so popular? What made it so different than the other mics that followed? And the guy at Shure Brothers was like, I wish I can give you a real straight answer, but it's the way we designed it. But because of the manufacturing process, certain things can no longer be obtained at a price that they can sell. So if you have an SM5B, try to get it, fixed up if it's in bad shape, and hold on to it. Don't let it go. But just had to throw that out there because I've gotten calls from people about SM7s, SM5s, and why are these so popular for microphones for use. So that's it.
I thought you were going to say
Go ahead.
Went to 11.
Yeah, it goes to 11.
Alrighty. Well, that does it for us for this Week in Radio Tech, episode 166. Again, just drop an email for questions, and we'll see you all next week.
That's all the bandwidth we can pilfer this week. Another TWiRT has propagated, and all the transmitters and audio equipment live happily ever after, thanks to the handsome engineer and his kind, benevolent care. We'll be back next week.
Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
This Week in Radio Tech. Subscribe to iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Search for This Week in Radio Tech in the iTunes Store. Soliciting is strictly encouraged. If you liked today's show, tell a friend. If you didn't like it, we were never here. Kirk Harnack's wardrobe provided by the Salvation Army and the Red Cross Disaster Relief Services. Hair and makeup provided by Penny Lope Garcia Hernandez Weinberg.
He's unique, wouldn't you say?
I just want to get it over with.
This ends this transmission. Tango, Whiskey, India, Romeo, Tango. Signing off. Okay.